And again, we appreciate your patience. I'll now turn things over to Paul Benyon.
Hey everybody, sorry about the delay. This is Paul Benyon. I am the Director of Training at $100. Let's get started. We're going to talk about the basic principles of project control. And let's begin. Just a quick blurb about $100. If any of you don't know who $100 is, we are all about project cost management, which really comes down to three things. Being able to put together cost model estimates, being able to, once the project is underway, be able to measure progress so we can compare how we're actually performing to what we had planned or budgeted, and then finally coming up with a good estimate at completion, being able to predict the future the best that we can of where are we going to end up on the project. Are we going to be over budget or not? So that being said, let's jump in. Our agenda today is going to focus on these four areas. First of all, why do project controls? What's the benefit? Of course, what do? How can we put together a recovery plan effectively? And last of all, project status meeting. I'm going to talk about how the project status meeting can be one of the key elements to help you So if you traveled 120 miles and you're a degree off, you're going to end up being 2 miles off track, which and they decided it was actually Mount Ariba. That is what happened with their plane. Lesson or moral of the story, you can be off just a couple of degrees and it can be disastrous. Get it back on course, guess what? It starts to build, starts to compound. Costs are getting beyond the budget, and you're losing, cutting into your profit, and it can be just as disastrous. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a project is going to be a bad plan. Then when you establish that, the comparison that you're giving, you're going to be off. So here is an example. We have a bridge at the Hoover Dam that was built, finished a few years ago. And you'll notice that there are 15 pairs of columns there. Each one of those columns has the precast concrete that are put together. Kind of harder to see there, but just a closer look. Each of these segments, well, these columns, which happen to be 1,200 feet in the air, turns out one of those segments was a centimeter off, just a fraction of a centimeter off. So they had to completely uncap it, do a new segment of concrete, cost them thousands of dollars in labor costs and material costs. And so it comes back to having a good plan and being able to is one of the big keys. And everyone knows that there is no such thing as the perfect plan, right? You put the best plan in place, but that plan is going to be changing. There's going to be the unforeseen things that happen. So we got to be and to be able to monitor and control your costs and your schedule. So that's what we're going to talk about. There's some risks that you can foresee. Maybe there's certain tasks that you know are going to be volatile because of the weather. And so you can plan accordingly. And a big part of risk control is putting good contingency plans in place. But there's also the unforeseen. For example, what not to do. Go ahead and click on this. It's going to take us to where there was some road work being done, and there were some dig outs in the road, and somebody did not pay attention to the traffic control. You can see what happened. Here, there was a driver, literally drove right into the dig out. Now, the interesting thing about this story, the driver, I don't know, was out of sorts or what have you. He was so discombobulated that he actually fled the scene, and they don't know what happened to him. But this is just an example. Clearly, this affected the productivity of their work for the day, and no way they could have foreseen that that was going to happen. So how do we deal with risk? Well, there are some good things that can be set in place to be able to handle it the best that we can. First of all, we want to have a central repository where you're going to keep and tabulate all of the potential risks that are in place so that people can get to them and communicate about them. Secondly, you want to assign a person of responsibility to be the risk manager. That's the person that's going to oversee all of those risks that are getting tabulated. And it's very important that this risk manager has authority. He can take action. He can put risk contingency plans into effect. And then also, he's got to have good understanding of the overall project, how it's going, have the big picture. And he would attend any of the project status meetings that occur and be able to report on the risk for the project. It's also important that we have a separate meeting just to identify the risks that there are and monitor them. And that doesn't have to be every day or once a week necessarily even. Most projects, once a month is sufficient to keep up on it, keep track of things. Now, when it comes to actually monitoring that risk, there's a good process to follow. First of all, you want to identify the risk. Secondly, you want to assess and prioritize. This is extremely important. You don't want to have pages and pages of risk items. You want to try to keep it to one page, and then out of that one page, you're going to prioritize, weight it based on the impact it's going to have on the project to the top 5 or 10 items. So those are really what you want to then define a resolution strategy for. And then that risk manager really has to keep things going and put that strategy into effect. Make sure monitoring that risk, and he's going to then report on that as he goes to the project status meetings. Resolution, there's, as we know, all kinds of risks here, maybe the weather, traffic logistics, maybe you can't get any equipment that you need to rent, or there's a labor shortage. But as we're looking at each of these scenarios, there's really one of 3 decisions that we can make. First of all, we could say, you know what, we're just going to scope. We're actually going to alter the project so that we eliminate out that task that's related to that. Usually, that's the last thing we want to do because we want to protect the project and keep it on course. So option number 2 is we look at it and say, well, how can we reduce this risk? And perhaps one of the best and most often used ways is to have some contingency set aside to be able to cover these unforeseen things that happen. So when that car went into the dig out and caused us to be unproductive, kind of set us back, maybe there's some contingency dollars that we had that we could dedicate to that. Now we also can plan ahead and have some contingency plan in place even before the project is underway. And that's what we put under the accepting it bucket. We're basically saying, you know what, we're going to put some aside because we know some things are going to come up. Seeing things, that's last resort. Reducing, probably the most common. Well, what about issues that come up? We would define an issue as any dispute or problem that comes up that's a disagreement between two parties in the project. Maybe see things a little bit differently. Obviously, it needs to have some resolution. Sometimes the issue can turn into a change order case. An issue is one where the contractor is working with a subcontractor to do some excavation work. In this case, the excavation work is broken into two activities. The first activity is some stripping. Now that's just the first 6 inches, and you can see it's at $2 per square yard. And then the other portion is excavation work, or general excavation. Notice it's at $10 per cubic yard, and if you did the math there, you find the excavation is more pricey because they're actually going to be doing some fine-grade subgrading in there. Well, when the prime goes to pay the subcontractor based on what he got paid from the owner, the subcontractor says, no, I'm not getting paid enough for the work that I did. So the prime asks the sub, all right, well, give me the detail. What did you measure out? What did you take off? And how would that compare to what you actually did? And guess what the subcontractor said? I don't got it. So the problem here, lesson number 1, is there's not enough detail because there was not documentation of what was going on. Very important. We want to be documenting as much as we can. So guess what happened? The subcontractor had to pay the prime contractor to figure out this mess. And what it ended up being was the owner. The owner had actually measured this out differently, and instead of paying the lower cost or the lower amounts to the contractor for 6 inches, he paid it for 8 inches. So basically kind of undercutting the subcontractor. And so this ended up being a change that the owner realized thanks to the prime and got repaired, got resolved. So when it comes to handling this issue control, there's some things that we can set in place just like we did with the risk control. And one of the things is to use a form to be able to track our issues and make sure they get resolved. That's going to consist of, first of all, the requester info, description of the issue, what's recommended, and really important, what would be the impact on the project if it doesn't get resolved. Basically stating the case for how we need to handle this. And then there's going to be an initial review of the issue. And that's basically the reviewer looks at it, makes comments on it, and is also going to decide, does this need to progress to become a change order, or can we resolve it and close it out? And so then we're going to track it to the closure or track it to becoming a change order. Okay, so that form kind of keeps things under control. And finally, we'll end up with some final results. And the issue turns into a change order. So what we're looking at here is soil. This is soil that's contaminated soil, has a lot of oil in it. What happened in this case was a contractor was doing some excavation work close to an old timber mill, and without anyone being aware, they had buried a bunch of the PCB oil in the dirt, in the ground, and no one knew about this at the time of the contract. So this is not part of the original scope to remove this soil. So the contractor goes to the owner and says, hey, this isn't our deal. We need to have a change order because it's going to be a lot of cost for us. We've got to wash all of our equipment off. We have to basically set up a truck wash on site every day to take care of the equipment. We've got to hire a specialty contractor to come and haul off all the soil. So in this case, the owner approved of this, and we had a change order. So change orders really, the only way that you can manage these changes is by setting up an original baseline. So as you can see here, you have your original budget or baseline. This is what the project was originally costing, and this is what the timing of the project was. Well, then, as changes come up, we may get approved of a change, and we're going to see a difference. We're going to see how does our cost end up shaping up compared to what we had originally planned in our baseline. So again, there's some best practices we can do to manage this process. First of all, once again, we're going to have a central repository for all your change issues, all that information. So again, hopefully you have a project management system in place, maybe something like $1. Maybe not. That's okay. Maybe even at the very worst case scenario, you might use Excel to kind of keep tabs on all this. But then you want to have a good change management process that has documentation. In other words, what happens when a change order comes up? Who does it get sent to? You want to have a change control manager that's managing all of this. So there's a good process, a good approval process in place. So once again, just like we had an issue form, we have a change control form. You're going to have the requester info that describes the change order, gives justification for it, and what is the impact if it's not implemented. An initial reviewer, this is typically the project manager, is going to review it, and he's going to decide, are we going to proceed with this change order? Do we reject it, or do we just defer it? If he says, yeah, let's go ahead, we need to do it, then we're going to do initial impact analysis. This is where the project team is going to figure out, well, okay, if we proceed with this change order, how much is it going to cost us? How is it going to affect our schedule? And they need to do a mock-up or a what-if scenario to figure that out. And then we send it off to the shareholders, and if they approve it, then it comes back, and we will then track that change order on through with the rest of our project. Well, so that finally takes us to monitoring and controlling our costs and schedule. So why do we monitor our costs and our schedule? Well, we're comparing it to that baseline that we had set up, and monitoring it allows us, again, to be able to predict likely events that will occur. It's not about what has happened, it's about what is going to happen. And it's only as good as what we do with the information. Well, we can't do the effective management if we don't have the information in the first place. You can't manage what you don't control. So, taking a look at cost and schedule control, we have some reporting that can come out of it, the analysis that comes out of the information that we pull in. So the first battle is to pull that information from the field. And there's a lot of tools out there to be able to help with that. $1 has some tools in place to be able to gather information up from the field and get it into a centralized place where you can manage that information. But the three main elements that I want to point out, number one is schedule tracking. As you're pulling in actual dates of when things occur, you're going to compare that again to your baseline schedule and make sure that you're staying on track. Secondly, you're going to have planned versus actual kind of reporting. So you can see any variances. Like in this case, our plan value, we can see that at this point in time it should have been at $500,000 according to the schedule, but then our earned value, where we should be with our costs, is only at $450,000, and we're actually at $400,000. This is kind of information we need, or the project manager needs, to be able to predict how are we going to move forward. And then last of all, we have our estimate at completion report. It gives me all the information we were just looking at, our plan versus earned versus actual, our variance. But then this is the key, being able to predict where are we going to end up with each of these tasks at the end of the project based on taking a look at the remaining work that we have and using a productivity kind of factor to give our best guess about where things are going to end up. So we look at these control processes that are in place. Let's say we encounter an actual issue. We see that we're going off course. Well, there's some good questions that we want to ask at that point to measure the issue. Is the project still meeting the objectives that were originally established? Are the issues so great that the project must be adjusted? And last, can the project meet the organization's business needs? So if any of these are a no, then serious consideration needs to be made. Maybe it's going to involve a change order to change the scope, or worst case scenario, it could defeat the whole project as a whole and it gets sidelined. Hopefully that's not the case. We want to have a good recovery plan that we use, that we put in place. So in this case, the recovery plan, there's, again, some best practices for that. So we got an issue, and what do we do with it? Well, first of all, we want to do damage control the best we can. That means quick, decisive action. You want to fix it quick, limit the damage. So how do we do that? Well, first, we have all of those good processes in place that we were talking about, so we are keeping track of what's going on, and we can identify these issues right away before a molehill turns into a mountain. So we want to identify, is there an issue with the schedule? Is there an issue with costs? Then we're going to take action, get approval, and then monitor the outcome, just like we had been doing. So with a good recovery plan in place, it's very important as we're going along, and you hear the people say, don't lose sight of the forest because of the trees. Well, sometimes as you're working in those processes, you can kind of lose sight of the big picture that we're talking about. I'm in the trees, in the weeds, working on these issues. I got to remember what's the ultimate goal of the project so that we don't end up too far down the line and realize, we're off track. So one thing that really helps us with that, what I call the cornerstone of project controls, is a project status meeting. Now, we take cornerstone a lot. In case you didn't know, a cornerstone really is the first stone that is laid for a foundation. It's what keeps all the other stones on track. So they all line up and compare to that first stone. And that's really how this project status meeting is. A couple things about it. It's necessary because we are trying to coordinate all these different teams working together, and we need to have a regular meeting where they get together and review and summarize everything. So schedule, resource needs, financial needs. And to make that happen, you know what? It's got to be a regular and consistent meeting. That means pick the same day, same time, same place. Have it be on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or a Thursday preferably, because Mondays and Fridays usually don't work, as you know. Some tips to cover at the first meeting, because we want to establish the way this meeting is going to go right, so it's not wasting anyone's time. First of all, we need to establish what's the baseline of the project. Then how are risks being managed and reported? We talked about that. We need to have the risk manager there and make sure that he has responsibility for that, along with the change control manager that handles the changes in the issues. And then make sure that we have the right team in place to monitor and update our schedule and cost information. We also want to make sure that we aren't sidestepping quality and making sure that we have assigned out someone to be monitoring the quality as well. And one really important thing is having a scribe or a secretary. Sounds like a small thing, but it's actually huge. To keep the project on track, we've got to be keeping minutes, keeping notes of what was discussed, what was decided in these meetings. These meetings are only worthwhile if there's some action that comes out of those meetings, that things are going to happen. And if we don't keep track of who's doing what, it's not going to happen. And then last of all, establish the regular, consistent time that the meeting will occur. Tips to a good status meeting: start and end the meeting on time. Don't allow people coming in and out of the meeting all the time because, you know what, if it's wasting people's time, they aren't going to come. You want to make sure that you don't just try to rattle things off as you remember them in your head. Have an agenda, have a handout so that everyone can follow it. And then, like I mentioned before or alluded to, you want to review the meeting minutes from last time, make sure we have followed up on all of the action items, and then make new assignments for new action items to make sure that everything keeps rolling along. Along with that, you do want to have an informal review as well. And for that informal review to work, basically that comes down to just management by walking around. That's going, walking the halls, visiting on site. A lot of times, even though the formal meeting is extremely important, it's the cornerstone, it still sometimes doesn't foster open communication that you're going to not get any other way otherwise than just sitting and talking with team members. This is where you might have a disgruntled employee that is on a key part. He's a team leader. He's not happy with how something's changed on the project, and guess what? He could end up leaving. He leaves. Now we have a major problem that could derail the project. So it's being kind of on the ground with the team members, making sure everything's going well. All right, so that being said, just to sum up what we've covered so far, we've looked at why are we doing this, why is project control so important, again, to keep us on course so that we don't end up in disaster zone. Second, predicting the future, that's how we do it. We control these elements, risk, issues, changes, schedule, cost, to be able to take our best prediction of how things are going to end up. We're going to make course corrections as needed using our recovery plan, and we're going to monitor all this by good, consistent project status meetings. So that being said, what we're going to do now, we're going to jump over to I'm going to actually jump into hard dollar as an example of how we can handle control of change orders, and also how we can take a look at some of that reporting that I was showing, which consisted of planned versus actual and so forth. So let's jump into hard dollar and take a quick look here. So the first place that I am going to jump into is the trading job. We're going to take a look at how would I manage a change order in hard dollar. So I'm going to open up what's called the cost breakdown structure. And I'm going to start with everything collapsed down just to make it easier to look at. And we're going to take a look at even a simpler view here. Actually, we'll just leave it as it is. So in this case, we happen to be looking at my project where I have the current estimate that I'm looking at. Now, the current estimate in hard dollar, that's my working estimate at that point in time. So it's a kind of a testing ground where I can try out new potential change orders. And in this case, the situation is I'm the prime contractor. I have a subcontractor who's doing some guardrail work. And the sub goes and installs 200 linear feet of this guardrail type 2, and then along comes a car that, once again, wasn't paying attention to the signs and runs into the guardrail and just twists it up, ruins the 200 linear feet that were installed. So again, no fault of the contractor. This is something that we're going to submit to the owner and say, hey, we need to increase the scope 200 linear feet to cover the cost. So we go and we're going to send off that request to the owner, but first of all, we want to figure out how much is it going to cost to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and in my working estimate, just try what if here. I'm going to change from 1,000 linear feet to 1,200 because I want to see the impact on my cost. So here I see I'm at $24,000 right now, and I'm going to go ahead and let it change my costs. And I now see in my current estimate, if I change that there, I can see my total cost is now $28,800, and there might be some additional costs up in my indirects as well. So one thing that I can do is I can have my changes log turned on, so I can go and take a look in my changes and see the change right there. There I changed this from 1,000 to 1,200, and as you may be aware, if you're familiar with hard dollar, we have a lot of ways we're tracking that change. So we have what's called the job total cost, where I'm keeping track of, let's just find it here. So here's my job total cost, total. Oh, I'm not finding it there, but it's one of these columns. Here it's showing me category by category. Here we go. Here's my job total cost difference. Now it's $4,901. So that tells me the effect, the impact of that. That's that what-if analysis. Now I can go and send that off for approval. Now in hard dollar, we now have the ability to have a baseline that we establish. And you can see, actually, I've already done that. Here I have my original budget total cost. Notice that it has not changed. It's still at $24,000. That's my baseline that I'm comparing to. I also have what's called current budget. It hasn't changed either. The current budget will be my budget at that point in time, which would include any changes that I've done. So let's go ahead and let's say we want to enter in a change order in hard dollar. I just go up to Forms, Budget Contract Changes. And this is where I can enter in any changes that I'm seeking approval on. So we're just going to call this guardrail contract change. And I'm going to throw in some details. So first I'm going to put in, how does this affect my budget? So I'm going to go select my guardrail item. And I know that it was $4,900 that's in a subcontract cost change. So I think it was $4,901. We'll enter that in. That's how much I want to adjust my budget. But I also know this isn't just a budget move, this is a contract change. So now I'm also going to assume that the owner is going to approve this and he is going to change the scope of his pay item. I'm actually getting paid off of. So I select the pay item and say, yeah, he is going to increase it 200 linear feet, which then gives me a price adjustment of what I will get paid. So maybe one of the project team members was tasked with entering in that change order. It has not been approved yet. And if I look back on my cost breakdown, even though my current estimate shows what I mocked up, my current budget, because I haven't approved that, still is set at its original baseline state. But the owner does approve it, so now it comes back to the change control manager. He can go in now, take a look at the changes that are pending, open them up, make sure everything looks right, yes, yes, and we are going to approve that change. Once I approve that change, it's marked as approved, and I go back to my cost breakdown, and now notice that my current budget includes the change order amount at $4,901. I can then compare that to my baseline and see how much has my budget changed from the beginning. All right, last thing I wanted to show real quick is we're closing in on questions. Let's jump into just one other example here. I'm going to bring up another project. This project, we're going to take a look at something that's underway quite a bit. You can see I have all of these items, and some of them have are overrunning on cost. See, this is my cost variance. You can see right in hard dollar, I can bring up a basic estimate at completion report, task by task, as I'm going along. You can see, for example, this item right here, the placing of the aggregate base. I see we're 75% done. Our planned value was, this is with approved changes, is 49,885, and I should, at 75% done, should be at 37,413. That's my earned value, and I'm going over just a little bit. So this might be something that I want to pursue a little bit, weigh this. Is this an issue? Does this involve any change management? Maybe we can just make sure we're being more productive on site. Okay. Last of all, if I take a look at my cash flow, I can see how does this actually graph out. And we're just going to change our view a tad here and look at my total price, total cost, and we're going to look at our actual costs and our earned value. So if I take a look at this all, now I see how does everything match up. And we're just going to focus on where we are so far. So I see this red line right here is my planned value, including payment timing. I see the green line is my planned revenue. And then I see these two lines are where I'm actually at and my earned value. So I can pull this up at any time graphically and see the same kind of information that I'm at. So that being said, these are the tools that, just some examples of how Hard Dollar is able to pull this information in and give you the monitoring and the analysis that you need, being able to monitor your changes and your costs and schedule changes. So that being said, I'm going to open it up to any questions that anyone has. We have about 12 minutes left. I'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Oh, we do have a few questions in the queue. We encourage you, anyone else, if you do have a question, to please ask in the question section under Go to Webinar. First question we have is, can Hard Dollar facilitate risk baselining?
Risk baselining, yes. So, in a sense, so Hard Dollar, we aren't a full risk management kind of tool. We're more focused on your cost and productivity and those changes. However, we do have the ability to track at the item level. You can use tagging to be keeping track of your risk. So, for example, I'll just pull up two tags that I have prepared here. One is risk level, and then risk description. Find that here. Well, we'll go with risk level for right now. So you can see on, let's do it on this job where I actually have this defined a little bit. Just bear with me just a second here. Oh, there we go. Here's risk level, risk description. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm keeping track of my risk level and monitoring my risk item by item as I'm going along. So, for example, we saw that guardrail was a potential risk, not so much because of that unforeseen accident, but because it was a new subcontractor, maybe lacking experience a little bit, but we thought it was worth going for it. So we've marked that as a medium level risk versus a high or a low. Okay. Now, you can have these all set up as part of your baseline, and then you can adjust it as needed.
Great. We have another question. In cash flow, how are revenues and payments reflected in schedule before importing from P6 to Hard Dollar?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. The import from Primavera to Hard Dollar, we can import from Primavera in the sense of the work breakdown structure. We can bring in the initial tasks and activities from Primavera. But as far as tracking costs and revenue, that's really, if you're using Hard Dollar, that is what Hard Dollar does best. I mean, we are a cost management tool. The assumption is that you would not be using Primavera then for managing your costs. So you would handle all of the costs and the revenue in Hard Dollar. And when you do that, we jump back to that cash flow we were looking at. The cost and revenue that you're figuring out there, you can see that it's reflecting some payment timing, this kind of stair step every time I'm getting paid. And there's an entire set of cash flow options that allow me to set up my payment timing to be able to manage that. Last thing I'd say with that is, as far as if you do need to have your schedule be cost loaded, maybe that's part of the analysis that you're doing or that you need to send, you can take all of the cost information that is being calculated in hard dollar and push that over to Primavera.
Great, thank you. One other question. When you need to change your schedule baseline, your cost baseline in other words, in your professional opinion, what should be the key reasons?
Yeah, again, one of the biggest issues in project control is lack of discipline in sticking to the baseline. That too quick to go ahead and just change the scope. Well, it waters it down to the point that all of a sudden your project is starting to be completely different and you lose the objectives of the project. So we want to always have that goal in our mind to stick to the baseline as much as possible. However, it comes back to those questions when we were deciding, is it off course or not? Do we, in order to keep the integrity of the original plan, the original goals and objectives, sometimes it is necessary to adjust the baseline through a change order. Again, something completely unforeseen like the contaminated soil, that clearly requires a change to our baseline in order for us to meet our objectives. So hopefully that's a reasonable answer for you.
That's great. We do have time for a couple of more questions. One we do have is hard dollar available for Mac as opposed to PC?
Yeah, so great question. The technical answer there is we do not support it directly on a Mac. However, we have plenty of clients that are using it on a Mac using the Windows operating system, which, as you know, with the Mac, you can be running Windows on the Mac, and hard dollar is working just fine on there. We also have our newer product, Lasso, which is completely web-based, so absolutely it would work on the Mac. And Lasso is basically our project cost management reporting tool. So everything that we are gathering up into this repository, you're going to be able to have that pumped right up into dashboards and reports that are built for every party involved in the project, from the owner to the contractor, EPCM, and also at all levels. So CFO, the project manager, the estimator.
Great. We have time for a couple more questions. Paul, can you talk about a provision in hard dollar for rates from other countries, not just the U.S. dollar? How is that handled to a hard dollar?
Yeah, great question. Hard dollar actually handles that really well. We have the ability to set up multiple currencies. I'll just kind of show you on the screen here as I'm talking. You can see that there's a place where we can enter in multiple currencies, and you can see all of the different currencies of the world that are in there, basically. So we have many international clients that are using this, and what they'll do is they'll set up resource rate files. So they'll have a set of resource rates for Indonesia. Maybe they're a mining company, and they're doing work in Indonesia, Canada, and Chile. And so they're going to have a rate set for each one of those with their correct currencies. And the nice thing is, within a project, you can actually have multiple currencies being used in the project, and then the currencies can roll up. So say for this processing equipment, the refining area is being calculated in Canadian dollars, but that's going to roll up into U.S. dollars at the higher level activity, for example. And then it can all roll up to whatever final currency you want at the project level.
Great. Looks like we have a question specific to the oil and gas services industry. For most of the time, construction projects, you have to define an administrative, undefined, and profit percentage to make your offer. How can you track costs that were not planned, but you need to relate them to undefined CBS code, knowing that CBS codes have planned qualities?
Okay, so if I'm understanding that right, it's the cost that you want to track that wasn't part of the original budget, so it's not connected with any pay items that were part of the original proposal, we said. You are able to put in indirect costs right into what we call our cost breakdown structure. Anytime you can see actually an example down here. I have job overhead, some indirect costs that were added down at the bottom section of my estimate, which is allowing me to be able to handle any additional indirect items that come up, and then I can track those items. So hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, I will give you my contact information at the end here. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll follow up. I could even talk to you over the phone to clarify if you need it.
Next question is, are there options to have LASSO non-cloud-based and to be supported in a different way besides a cloud offering?
Yeah, so the answer is that is in our future plans. It's on our roadmap. It's one of the next things that's slated, actually. However, at this time, no.
That sounds great, and it looks like that's all the questions we have at this time. Again, we do appreciate you joining us today. We will email you a link with the video from today's presentation, as well as a link to the quiz that you can expect to receive tomorrow. Once you complete and submit that quiz, you will receive your certificate within 3 to 5 days. So again, we do appreciate you joining us today. We thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you. Paul, I think you have a schedule of our next events, correct?
Yeah, I sure do. Again, a little plug from the training side. If you guys are looking for the classroom kind of training for an Estimating 101 or 201 class, you can see the scheduled dates that are coming up. We also have our next webinar that's a CEU webinar, just like this, where you can get certified for CEUs. The next one's going to be May 15th, benchmarking. And last of all, we are really excited to be rolling out a new kind of learning. It's the interactive e-learning, where you have step-by-step interaction in the product at your own pace, whenever and wherever you want. These are individual courses, little modules that you can purchase on a one-by-one basis, kind of go at your speed, and they're very interactive. They have real-world context, and so we're excited to be launching that in our Learning Management Center, and we have our initial courses available there: budget management, rational forecasting, and benchmarking, and many, many more to come.
And how much are the classes in Scottsdale?
The classes in Scottsdale, I assume you're talking about the classroom classes there?
Correct.
Yeah, they're $1,100 for the Estimating 101 classes, and I believe $1,300 for the Estimating 201 classes. To register, simply jump onto our website, go to training, and you'll see the schedule there, and you can click there to enroll. It'll have the pricing as well.
And the website will have other classes as they're rolled out down the road too as well, correct?
Absolutely.
Terrific. Well, again, thank you, Paul, and thank you all for joining us. And again, we will email you the link with the video and the quiz. Once you complete that, you'll receive your certificate within about 3 to 5 days.